Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're diving into exactly how governments and sociologists go about measuring societal trends, inequality, and everyday human behavior. It's this really fascinating intersection, right? We've got the raw data governments collect on one side, and on the other, how sociologists use and, sometimes heavily critique that very same data to understand the world we actually live in.
So, I want to kick things off with a pretty stark number, just 24%. Hold that figure in your head for a second. It's a very specific, officially recorded statistic all about educational achievement here in the UK. But you've got to ask yourself, what does a number like that actually tell us about inequality? I mean, does it represent some unchangeable law of society, a total failure of the system, or something else completely? And more importantly, how do we even know if it's a reliable reflection of reality? When we see a statistic published by some major authority, we tend to just accept it as absolute truth. Well, today, we're going to interrogate that assumption. Here's our agenda for today. First, defining official statistics. Second, Durkheim and Positivism. Third, educational achievement data. And finally, number 4, the PET evaluation.
All right, Section 1, defining official statistics.
At their core, official statistics are simply numerical data produced by the government or its various agencies. And this gives us a massive, quantified snapshot of the population. We're talking about data that can be counted, verified, and statistically manipulated. Usually, it's all numbers and figures. And look, this isn't just some small survey of 20 people in a room. This is massive, quantitative data collected on a national scale, which naturally makes it incredibly powerful for spotting large, macro-level societal trends.
Moving on to Section 2, Durkheim and Positivism.
So to really understand why this kind of quantitative data is so highly revered in sociology, we have to look at the macro-level theory, specifically early thinkers like Émile Durkheim and this whole concept of positivism. Now, positivists like Durkheim and Auguste Comte, who's basically the father of modern sociology, they absolutely loved quantitative data. They believe that reality exists outside and totally independently of the mind. Because of that, they argued society operates on objective laws and what they called social facts, things that can be measured just like physics or chemistry. Think of social facts as institutions, norms, and values that exist externally to you and me, but actually constrain or shape our behavior. Positivists want to uncover these facts through inductive reasoning, basically accumulating data through really careful observation and measurement. In fact, positivists argue that for sociology to be considered a true science, it absolutely must rely on 5 core components. First, it has to be empirical, meaning we can actually count and measure the info. Second, it's got to be testable, so that scientific knowledge can be retested and verified by others. Third, theoretical. It shouldn't just describe what's happening, it needs to seek causal relationships to explain why it's happening. Fourth, it must be cumulative, building on previous knowledge over time. And fifth, crucially, it must be objective. Personal feelings, beliefs, prejudices, they have absolutely no place here. The researcher has to be totally detached and value-free.
Okay, Section 3, educational achievement data.
Now let's zoom in a bit and apply this macro-level theory to some real, tangible data right inside the education system. Remember that 24% figure we talked about at the start? Let's revisit that by looking at some data from the Department for Education and Skills, the DFIS, from 2007. This is a classic example of an official statistic being used to track differential educational achievement across different social groupings. That 2007 data revealed a pretty shocking trend. It showed that only 24% of white male pupils on free school meals gained 5 A's to C grades. Now, if you're not familiar, free school meals, or FSM, is a really standard metric used to indicate material deprivation and working class status. So this statistic right here immediately highlighted a massive disparity. It showed that working class white males were actually one of the lowest performing demographics in the entire education system at that time. A positivist would look at this data and go, aha, we've uncovered a concrete social fact about class, gender, and education. And because official statistics give us that big picture view, we can spot other striking trends too. For instance, middle-class pupils consistently outperform working-class pupils, and that's across all ethnic groups. We see variations in ethnicity as well. On average, white and Asian pupils achieve higher than black pupils, and Indian pupils statistically do better than Pakistani and Bangladeshi pupils. And when we look at gender, girls generally outperform boys across most subjects. That's a gap that's been steadily widening, especially in subjects like English. But how exactly is all this data collected over time?
Well, we can measure this differential achievement across different stages of a person's life by tracking their journey from school all the way to higher education. For a long time, the government used raw GCSE grades, literally just looking at the percentage of students getting those 5 A-star to C grades. Then, in 2016, they introduced a metric called Attainment 8, which measures average grades across 8 different subjects. Next, we can look at UCAS data, which tracks university acceptances across those same social groups. By combining all these official statistics, sociologists can track that entire educational journey and see exactly where certain demographics start to fall behind.
Bringing us to Section 4, the PET evaluation.
So the data we've been looking at is fascinating. It's incredibly detailed, and it's highly influential in shaping actual government policy. But can we actually trust it? To critically assess official statistics, or really any research method for that matter, sociologists use a super handy mental model called the PET evaluation. PET, that stands for practical, ethical, and theoretical factors. Let's step through these one by one to evaluate just how useful that government data really is.
Let's look at the pros and cons here. Practically speaking, official statistics are fantastic. I mean, they are cheap and easily accessible. The government has already spent literally millions of pounds collecting this data, so a sociologist can just hop online and download it. But there's a catch. Because the government collects it for their own administrative purposes, it might not actually answer the specific research questions a sociologist is asking. Now, ethically, it's a researcher's dream. There's no worrying about informed consent or invading anyone's privacy because the data is already public and fully anonymized. But theoretically, this is where we hit a major divide. For positivists, these stats are gold. They're highly reliable and representative because of the massive sample sizes. You could repeat the analysis and get the exact same results. But for critics, there are some really serious limitations. The data is absolutely open to manipulation. Governments can just change how they measure things, like swapping out those raw GCSE metrics for Attainment 8 just to make their performance look better. Plus, it really lacks deep validity. Sure, it tells us that 24% of working-class boys achieve those grades, but it completely fails to tell us why. It doesn't capture the lived experience, the peer pressure, or the teacher labeling that actually happens inside the classroom.
And that perfectly brings us to the flip side of the sociological coin. Interpretivists totally reject the positivist obsession with statistics. They argue that to truly understand society, you need something called Verstehen, basically deep empathy and an insider's view, which you can only get through direct observation and qualitative data. They suggest that official statistics don't necessarily reflect reality at all, but rather just the labels applied by those in authority. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a somewhat provocative thought from that interpretivist camp. Do official statistics actually uncover the objective truth of human behavior, or are they just a shared fiction constructed by the state? Next time you see a massive statistic flash across the news, ask yourself, what exactly is this number measuring? And more importantly, what is it hiding?